The next program is regarding the messages.
Key messages
Hazur's mentioned,
yes.
Hazur sent to various countries, as well as has been saying for the last year or so, very clearly to the world, to mind its ways and come to one God.
Exactly. Well, there's been a very clear message to us as a Jamaat to pray to Allah more than ever that He would have mercy upon particularly those who are persecuted across the world, and also for the world, the letters which have been written, a key message of peace, one God, and now is the time that we must enter into our hearts and really seek the forgiveness of Allah, that He will bestow His mercy and His blessings upon us. So let's take a closer look at some of the key messages that Hazur, may Allah strengthen his hand, his key messages throughout this recent year.
In today's world, one terrifying manifestation of God's decree could be in the shape of another world war. There is no doubt that the effects of such a war and its destruction will not be limited to the war itself or even to this generation. In fact, its horrific consequences will be exhibited for many generations to come.
The world in 2012 stands on the brink of calamity, with economic doom and gloom forecast for years, if not decades to come, global uprisings as a result of or leading to government failures, general social decay caused by a loss of basic moral values. The only certainty in our world today is uncertainty itself. How will we get out of the economic crisis that has crippled much of the world? And if the developed world faces such a severe financial situations, how can there be any hope for the poor of the world? If governments are not facing up to their responsibilities, then what is to stop more of the world's public from often violent and destructive uprisings? And where there is no fear or respect for authority, whether it is spiritual or political, how can moral and social values possibly be a priority? One thing is clear: without any real intervention and effort, the upheaval in the world today cannot continue at the pace it is without a catastrophic climax. Political and social mistrust and treachery mean that few countries or organizations have the power to put a stop to the spiraling world. Putting aside all entities that only seek their self-interests or lack any real power in this world, it is even clearer that the one power that does exist is God and His laws. It is for this reason that the divinely appointed manifestation of God's power here on this earth is seeking to spread God's message and answer to these troubled times.
It is important to always remember that human knowledge and intellect is not perfect, but is in fact limited. Thus, when making decisions or forming thoughts, often certain factors enter human minds which can cloud judgment and lead to a person trying to fulfill his own rights. Ultimately, this can lead to an unjust outcome and decision being made. However, God's law is perfect, and so no vested interests or unfair provisions exist. This is because God only desires for the good and betterment of His creation. And therefore, His law is based entirely on justice. The day the people of the world come to recognize and understand this crucial point will be the day that the foundation for true and everlasting peace will be laid.
In the past year alone, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Ayyadahu Ta'ala bin Asnil Aziz has addressed political leaders, religious leaders, and members of the public on the perilous situation we face. While politicians, economists, and social groups try to find answers, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih has pointed out on a number of occasions that the only pure, true answer exists in the implementation of God's laws. One such occasion was the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community UK's annual Peace Conference in March 2012, attended by many UK politicians, dignitaries and journalists, including the London Mayor and several members of Parliament.
But what I wish to say is that merely delivering or listening to speech or lecture is not enough and will not lead to peace being established. In fact, the key requirement to fulfilling this primary goal is absolute justice and fairness in all matters. The Holy Quran in chapter 4, verse 136 has given us a golden principle and lesson guiding us about this. It states that as a means to fulfill the requirements of justice, if you have to bear witness and testify against even yourself, your parents, or your closest relatives or friends, then you must do so. This is true justice, where personal interests are set aside for common good.
Hazrat Amirul Mumineen stated that while governments and organizations claim to make policies based on justice with the aim of establishing peace, still disorder and strife continue. In fact, restlessness and anxiety is only increasing, not abating despite increased government intervention. Clearly, somewhere justice is not being fulfilled. This is a fundamental teaching of Islam, preserved for eternity in the Holy Quran.
O ye who believe, be steadfast in the cause of Allah, bearing witness in equity, and let not people's enmity incite you to act otherwise than with justice. Be always just, that is nearer to righteousness, and fear Allah. Surely Allah is aware of what you do. Chapter 5, verse 9.
Hazrat Amirul Mumineen cited this verse amongst most basic teachings of Islam in personal letters written to leaders of many countries of the world in the past year. In a message personally delivered to Pope Benedict XVI by the President of Ahmadiyya Jamaat Kababir, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih stated that the purpose of every religion is to bring man closer to God and establish human values. No founder of any religion has taught his followers to usurp the rights of others or act cruelly. Hazur Aqdas advised the Pope that as an influential voice in the world, the Pope should inform the world that by placing obstacles in the way of natural balance established by God, they are moving towards annihilation. In February, a letter to Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu urged the Prime Minister to protect the life of his nation and strive for peace and justice rather than spark war as is counselled in the Zabur and Torah. Similarly, Hazur Anwar wrote a letter to the President of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, in March that as followers of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we do not and cannot desire war for our world, regardless of the double standards of other major powers. Rather, it is a duty of a Muslim nation to devote its energies towards saving the world from a third world war, not oppose other nations merely out of enmity and hatred. But Hazur Aqdas also counselled American President Barack Obama that as a superpower, America should seek diplomacy, dialogue and wisdom, rather than using force to suppress other nations. In April, Hazur also advised China's Premier Wen Jiabao that Islam and Holy Quran inculcate all the high moral standards and much more that were fundamental in the country's revolution. Britain's Prime Minister David Cameron was reminded that as a country that can and does exert influence in the developed and developing world, it can guide the world in fulfilling the requirements of equity and justice. All the leaders were advised to seriously consider the ramifications of nuclear weapons and the serious threat of a third world war that would end in seconds due to atomic weapons, but would have ramifications for centuries and generations to come. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih further spoke on this topic directly to prominent leaders in both the USA and Canada during a historic and successful tour in the summer of 2012. Hazur Aqdas was welcomed on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. to address America's elected leaders, including Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. Hazur did not mince words, clearly stating that powerful countries have a duty to treat others fairly in order to attain peace.
The truth is that peace and justice are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. Leaving aside those people who are determined to create disorder in the world. No one can ever claim that in any society, country, or even the entire world, there can be disorder or a lack of peace where justice and fair dealing exists. Thus, it is clear teaching of Islam that the people of all nationalities and all races are equal. It is also made clear that all people should be granted equal rights without any discrimination or prejudice. This is the key and golden principle that lays the foundation for harmony between different groups and nations and for the establishment of peace. Islam has drawn our attention to various means for peace. It requires absolute justice. It requires truthful testimony to always be given. It requires that our glances are not cast enviously in the direction of the wealth of others. And it requires that the developed nations put aside their own vested interests and instead help and serve the less developed and poorer nations with a truly selfless attitude and spirit.
Hazrat Khalifatul Masih specifically recounted Islam's teachings on disputes between countries and how to handle them fairly. Hazur advised that disputes should be handled through dialogue and diplomacy. If this fails, countries should unite to fight aggression. When mutual negotiation is undertaken, all parties should work towards an agreement, which leads to long-standing peace and reconciliation. Harsh and unjust conditions should not be enforced that will lead to long-term restlessness and resentment. Hazur laid out the stark reality at a reception hosted in his honour by the Premier of Ontario, Canada, in July.
That the lack of trust and lack of honesty that we find in many countries will lead us to a grave and devastating war, where man does not fulfill the rights of others, but tries to usurp them. Then it is natural that the divine decree will take its hold. The end result is restlessness, a lack of contentment, and indeed wars come to pass. We are all aware that in the past few years there has been a global financial crisis that has caused widespread pain and torment. Apart from this, in certain countries, severe internal disorder has occurred, whereby the people and their governments are fighting against each other. Similarly, we also find that some nations are displaying hostilities and malice towards other countries. It is my opinion that this tragic state of affairs is all due to a lack of trust and a lack of truth, which in turn is leading to a lack of justice.
Hazur Aqdas has made it abundantly clear that while his message is simply God's message, it is a practical and just message, one that is entirely applicable to every situation, regardless of religion, race, or nationality. It does not depend on dealings with people of the same religion or race. It's a message and principle that can and should be applied to every people in every situation. It is an appeal to humanity to treat others with humanity, to avert possible destruction.
Thus, it is my ardent wish and hope that the leaders of all major nations come to understand this dreadful reality. And so instead of adopting aggressive policies and utilizing force to achieve their aims and objectives, they strive to adopt policies that promote and secure justice. We who are members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community try our utmost to save the world and humanity from all destruction. This is because in this era we have accepted the Imam of the age, who was sent by Allah as the promised Messiah and who came as a servant to the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who himself was sent as a mercy for all of mankind. It is because we follow the teachings of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, that we feel extreme pain and anguish in our hearts at the state of the world. And it is that pain which drives us in our efforts to try and save humanity from destruction and suffering.